Welcome, everyone, to another deep dive with us.
Yes.
Today, we're going to be looking at the legend of the Loch Ness Monster.
Very, very exciting. Yeah.
It's something that has captivated so many people for so long, and we're going to try to get to the bottom of it
Yeah.
in our deep dive today.
Yes, we are.
So where should we start? I guess we have to start right at the beginning, don't we?
Yeah, right at the beginning. So we're talking about the 6th century AD.
Okay.
And that's when we have the first kind of inkling of something strange in the water.
Okay.
This comes from the story of St. Columba, who was said to have encountered a water beast in the River Ness.
So this is even before we're talking about the Loch Ness. We're talking
Right. The River Ness.
Yeah, the River Ness, which of course flows into the Loch.
Okay.
And this beast had apparently attacked and killed a man.
Oh, wow.
And St. Columba, in a very dramatic display of faith,
Yeah.
supposedly scared the creature away.
Wow. So that's like a proper like biblical monster story.
Yeah.
It is. And it really I think, hints at that kind of enduring belief that there's something mysterious in these waters.
Right. And that is going to stick in people's minds for a
Yeah.
long time.
Definitely.
So we move forward then a few centuries. We get into the late 1800s.
Yes.
What sort of stories start to emerge then?
So then we start getting a few more detailed accounts.
Okay.
So in 1871, there's an account by D. Mackenzie
Right.
who describes seeing something in the water that he describes as a log-like object wriggling and churning up the water.
Okay.
So
Not necessarily a creature.
no, it doesn't say creature, but something strange and moving around.
Okay.
And then a few years later, there's a report of what someone describes as a stubby-legged animal near the shore.
Interesting.
So, it seems that the sightings start to become a bit more detailed, a bit more frequent as we move through the late 1800s.
Right, and that leads us perfectly then into the 1930s when I think Nessie really hit the world stage.
Yeah,
And 1933 seems to be a really pivotal year,
absolutely.
starting with this sighting by Aldi Mackay, who describes seeing a whale-like fish.
A whale-like fish, and this is actually considered to be the first widely reported modern sighting.
Right.
And it's also the first time that the term monster is used to describe the creature.
Right.
So it's really, with this encounter that the name Loch Ness Monster kind of is born.
Interesting.
As we know it.
So the legend is truly born at that point.
Yeah.
And then that same year, George Spicer and his wife describe seeing this creature resembling a dragon or a prehistoric animal crossing the road in front of their car.
Right. So this is quite a dramatic sighting.
Yeah, this is where it goes from being like a curiosity to something really
interesting.
Yeah, and I think the fact that this sighting is published in the Inverness Courier really captures the imagination of the world. Right, so now we've got the photographs, we've got the written descriptions.
Yes.
So it really is becoming front page news.
Absolutely. And the name is attached to the Loch Ness Monster. It's a global phenomenon at this point.
Right. And so this is when I think people really want to see this thing.
Yeah.
And they want proof. And that takes us, I guess, into the era of photographs.
Yes.
And film. And this is where things get, I think, even murkier.
It does.
And we have to talk about the surgeon's photograph.
Yes.
Like it's like the
an iconic image.
It's the icon of Nessie.
Exactly.
So tell me a bit about that photo.
So it was taken in 1934.
Okay.
By Robert Kenneth Wilson.
Right.
And it was held up as the best evidence for Nessie's existence for decades.
For decades.
It shows this long neck and this head emerging from the water.
Yeah.
And it just fit the classic image of the monster.
Yeah.
And it seemed like undeniable proof at the time.
Until it wasn't.
Exactly.
What happened?
So in the 1990s,
right,
it was revealed to be a hoax.
Oh.
And it was a meticulously planned hoax, I might add.
Okay.
What the photo actually depicted was a toy submarine.
A toy submarine.
A toy submarine.
Oh, wow. So how did they even,
Well, it was very cleverly done.
Yeah.
The mastermind behind this was a man named Marmaduke Wetherell, who was a big game hunter.
Right.
And he had apparently, sought revenge on the Daily Mail because they had ridiculed him after a previous Loch Ness Monster hoax.
Oh, so he was a bit of a
He was a bit of a
repeat offender.
Yeah.
A serial hoaxer.
Exactly.
Wow.
So, it's quite a story behind that photo.
That's crazy. So the most famous piece of evidence is actually a fabrication.
Is a fabrication a toy submarine?
Oh, wow. That's incredible.
Yeah.
But the surgeon's photo wasn't the only attempt. No. To capture Nessie on film.
No.
That same year, we have the Hugh Gray photograph.
Yes, the Hugh Gray photograph, which is another intriguing one.
Well, what does that show?
Well, it's quite blurry.
Right.
And interpretations range from an otter to a swan to even just Gray's dog fetching a stick from the loch.
Right. So again, open to interpretation.
Very much so.
And then a few years later, we have the first color film.
Yes.
The Taylor film.
1938, the Taylor film.
Was that any more conclusive?
It was analyzed by Maurice Burton.
Okay.
And he concluded that it probably just showed a floating object rather than a living creature.
Okay, so another sort of dead end.
Yeah, and then we have the Dinsdale film from 1960, which for a long time was considered to be one of the best pieces of footage that we have.
And what did that show?
Well, it shows this this wake moving through the water.
Right.
And it was analyzed by the Joint Air Reconnaissance Intelligence Center.
Wow.
Or JARIC. And they suggested that it was probably animate.
Wow. Okay.
Which was pretty big at the time.
Yeah.
However, later studies using more advanced techniques have concluded that it was most likely just a boat filmed under poor lighting conditions.
Right. So another, maybe a misinterpretation.
Yeah, possibly.
Okay. So film hasn't really helped us.
Not really.
So where do we go next?
Well, I think this is where things start to get even more organized.
Okay.
People want answers.
Yeah.
They want proof.
Right.
And we have technology starting to come into play.
Right.
And this is when we start to move into the era of organized searches for the Loch Ness Monster.
Fantastic. Well, let's take a little break and we'll come back and we'll look into those organized searches.
That's good.
So now we're talking organized searches for Nessie.
Yes, much more deliberate.
Yeah.
The first real expedition that we can talk about was in 1934, and this was led by Edward Mountain. And this involved 20 men being stationed around the loch for 5 weeks.
Wow.
Armed with binoculars and cameras.
That's dedication.
It is, yeah. They were all focused on spotting the elusive monster.
So what did they find?
Well, unfortunately, they didn't find any conclusive evidence.
Okay.
But it did mark the beginning of a new phase.
Right.
It was a shift from just those anecdotal sightings to a more systematic approach to unraveling the mystery.
Right. And then a few decades later, you have like a whole organization dedicated to the Loch Ness Monster.
Yes. In 1962, the Loch Ness Phenomena Investigation Bureau was established.
Wow.
Or the LNPIB. For short. And their goal was to really seriously study this phenomenon.
Right.
So they started with volunteer observation, encouraging people to report any unusual sightings.
Right.
But then they started incorporating technology into their investigations, and specifically sonar.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so using those sound waves to detect objects underwater. And in the late 1960s, there were studies led by D. Gordon Tucker.
Right.
And they identified targets moving at speeds that weren't typical of fish.
So something bigger.
So something, larger, potentially.
Okay.
And moving through the loch.
Did they think they'd found Nessie?
Well, it was intriguing. The sonar readings were promising, but it's very hard to say definitively with sonar. Loch Ness is deep and dark and full of debris, and there's all sorts of things that can
cause interference.
Exactly. So sonar was intriguing, but didn't quite solve the mystery.
No, but the search continued.
Oh, it did. In the 1970s, we have Robert Rines, who led several expeditions using sonar and an underwater camera.
Wow. Okay.
And his team actually captured some blurry photos that were interpreted by some as flippers, or even a plesiosaur-like body.
A plesiosaur, that's the...
that's the prehistoric
dinosaur.
marine reptile, exactly.
Okay, so are they saying that Nessie is like a dinosaur?
Well, that's a theory that we can look into a bit later.
Okay, yeah.
But back to Ryan's, his sonar readings, like Tucker's before him, were intriguing, but ultimately inconclusive.
Right.
And then we have Operation Deep Scan.
Operation Deep Scan.
In 1987.
Okay, what was that?
So this was a huge undertaking. It involved 24 boats equipped with sonar, and they basically created the sonar net across the loch.
Wow, that's huge.
It was massive.
Yeah.
And they did make contact with an unidentified object.
Okay.
But analysis suggested that it was most likely debris.
Okay.
Or possibly a group of seals.
So again, kind of a bit of a dead end.
Yeah.
Okay, and then a few years later, you have the big BGV search in 2003.
Yes. So the BBC sponsored this comprehensive sonar search for their documentary, searching for the Loch Ness Monster.
Right.
And they used, really sophisticated equipment.
Okay.
But again, they couldn't find any trace of a large unknown animal.
So decades of organized searches, increasingly advanced technology, and still nothing definitive.
No real proof.
You have to wonder at that point if maybe people are misinterpreting what they're seeing.
Yeah, I think that's a very valid point,
Yeah.
Perhaps the legend of Nessie is less about a monster.
Right.
And more about our own kind of tendency to see what we want to see, especially when we're dealing with something as vast and mysterious as Loch Ness.
So if not a monster, what are some of the explanations that people have put forward?
Well, one of the most likely explanations is simply misidentification of known animals.
Okay.
Loch Ness is home to a variety of creatures.
Yeah, of course.
Some of which could easily be mistaken for a monster under certain conditions.
Like what sort of animals are we talking about?
Well, eels, for instance.
Okay.
They can grow surprisingly large.
Yeah.
And their movements in the water can be quite sinuous.
Right.
And could easily be mistaken for something.
Yeah, something more monstrous.
More monstrous, yeah.
I've heard about these like giant eels in Loch Ness.
Yeah.
Is there any evidence to suggest that they are there?
Well, a 2018 DNA survey of Loch Ness found abundant eel DNA.
Okay.
So that's not definitive proof that people are mistaking eels for Nessie, but it certainly adds weight to the theory.
So eels are definitely a contender.
Yeah.
What about other animals?
Well, there have been theories about otters.
Okay.
Deer swimming in the loch.
Right.
Even swimming elephants from traveling circuses.
Wow.
There was that photo analysis that suggested the surgeon's photo could actually be the head and trunk of a swimming elephant.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So mistaken identity.
Yeah, particularly with blurry photos and fleeting glimpses.
Yeah. But what about those reports of like strange wakes or disturbances on the water?
Right.
That's harder to explain away.
Yeah. I mean, that's where I think inanimate objects and the unique characteristics of Loch Ness itself come into play. So boat wakes, for instance, they can persist long after the boat has gone.
Right.
Creating that illusion of something moving beneath the surface.
Right. So like the wake is still there.
Exactly.
But the boat's disappeared.
Yeah.
And then I guess floating logs, especially if they're partially submerged, could look pretty strange.
They could.
Yeah.
And then you have to consider the unusual wave patterns that can occur in Loch Ness.
Right.
These were called seiches.
Seiches.
Yeah, and they can create this impression of something rising and falling in the water.
Right.
Mimicking the movements of a large creature.
So what are seiches exactly?
So imagine a bathtub sloshing back and forth.
Right.
That's essentially what a seiche is.
Okay.
It's a large-scale oscillation of water, often caused by wind or other disturbances. And Loch Ness, because of its long, narrow shape, is particularly prone to seiches.
So that could explain some of those sightings where people say they see something breaking the surface.
Exactly. It's like the loch itself is playing tricks on people's eyes.
Right. And we can't forget the role of folklore.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Scottish lochs have long been associated with kelpies.
Kelpies?
Yeah, those mythical shape-shifting water spirits.
Right.
And it's not hard to imagine how those stories might influence how people perceive unusual sights in the water.
It's like the legend of the Loch Ness Monster is a blend of real-world phenomena.
Yes.
Folklore. And a bit of wishful thinking.
Definitely.
But let's be honest, there have also been some deliberate attempts to fool people.
Yeah, Nessie mania has attracted its fair share of hoaxers over the years.
So, like, what sort of hoaxes are we talking about?
Well, some have been quite elaborate.
Okay.
Like planting a fake monster corpse.
They planted a fake monster.
They did in 1972.
Wow.
A group of zoologists found a monster corpse in the loch.
Okay.
And it turned out to be a shaved and disfigured elephant seal.
Wow. That's commitment to a prank. It is.
That's amazing.
And then there are also the, misinterpretations of fossils, like the supposed Nessie tooth.
Right.
That turned out to be a muntjac antler.
So people have been trying to capitalize on this.
Oh, yeah?
For a long time.
Whether it's for a laugh or for, more nefarious reasons.
And it seems like there's no shortage of people trying to perpetuate the myth.
Yeah, or, maybe they genuinely believed it.
Yeah.
Who knows?
So we've got possible misidentifications, environmental quirks, folklore, and hoaxes. It's almost like the Loch Ness Monster is more of a cultural phenomenon than a real creature.
I think it's a fascinating blend of science, folklore, and human psychology.
But despite all of those explanations, there's still a part of us that wants to believe.
Yes.
Right? That maybe, just maybe, there's something extraordinary lurking down there.
I think that's the enduring appeal of the Loch Ness Monster.
Right.
It represents the unknown.
Yeah. The possibility that there are still mysteries out there waiting to be solved.
And who knows, maybe one day we'll find something.
We'll be surprised.
So what about those theories, then, that Nessie is some kind of prehistoric creature?
Right.
Is there any scientific basis to those claims?
Well, that's where we enter the realm of speculation.
Okay.
But it's speculation rooted in some intriguing possibilities.
Okay, let's dive into that. Okay, so let's talk about those more extraordinary theories.
Right.
One that keeps popping up is that Nessie could be a plesiosaur.
Yeah.
This long-necked marine reptile that supposedly died out millions of years ago.
Right.
I mean, it's a pretty captivating idea.
It is. It's a very captivating idea. And those descriptions that we have of a long neck and humps breaking the surface?
Right.
It does seem to fit the image of a plesiosaur.
Yeah,
But there are some significant challenges
to
this theory.
Like the fact that plesiosaurs lived in saltwater.
Exactly.
And Loch Ness is freshwater.
That's one of the main arguments against it.
Yeah.
But recent fossil discoveries have actually shown that some plesiosaurs could tolerate brackish water.
Okay.
Which is a mix of salt and fresh water.
Right.
And some even lived in polar regions.
Okay.
Which suggests that they could adapt to a wider range of environments than we previously thought.
So the freshwater argument isn't as clear-cut?
Not quite as clear-cut, no.
But what about the age of Loch Ness itself?
Yes.
It was formed after the last ice age, which means it's relatively young, geologically speaking.
Exactly. Loch Ness is only about 10,000 years old.
Right.
Whereas plesiosaurs are thought to have gone extinct with the dinosaurs around 66 million years ago.
Yeah.
That's a big gap.
Gap in time.
Yeah. So unless Nessie has found a way to time travel, the plesiosaur theory seems a bit far-fetched.
Well, some proponents of the plesiosaur theory suggest that a group of them could have been trapped in Loch Ness.
As the glaciers retreated and then adapted to that changing environment over generations.
Right, so a sort of lost colony of plesiosaurs.
Exactly.
But even if we entertain that idea, wouldn't they need to surface to breathe?
Well, you would think so.
I mean, a large air-breathing creature would be hard to miss.
It would be hard to miss. And, that lack of frequent obvious sightings is another argument against a large population of Nessies.
But maybe they've developed some sort of sneaky breathing technique.
Yeah.
Like a snorkel or something.
Some have suggested that there could be, nostrils or breathing tubes that allow Nessie to get air without creating a big disturbance on the surface.
Okay.
But again,
we have no evidence.
No evidence.
Okay. So let's say, for the sake of argument, that a population of plesiosaurs has managed to survive in Loch Ness all this time.
All right.
Wouldn't they need a substantial food source to survive?
That's another very valid point. Loch Ness doesn't have a particularly abundant food supply.
Right.
Certainly not enough to sustain a breeding population of large predators.
So the plesiosaur theory faces a lot of obstacles.
It does.
But it's fun to think about, isn't it?
It is.
The idea that there could be this real-life monster hiding in a Scottish loch.
It captures the imagination, and it speaks to our fascination with the unknown.
Absolutely.
But if we set aside the plesiosaur idea for a moment, what other explanations could there be for a large unknown creature in Loch Ness?
I've heard some pretty wild theories.
Oh, yeah.
What about a giant amphibian?
Right.
Like a supersized newt.
That's one idea that's been floated around.
Really?
That there's this newt-like creature that evolved to a massive size.
Right.
Within the unique environment of Loch Ness.
A supersized newt that's pretty out there.
It is.
Are there any other contenders for the title of Nessie?
Well, there's even a theory about a giant invertebrate.
Okay.
Perhaps a type of bristleworm. And this could explain the varying descriptions of Nessie's back shape.
Right.
And even some of the land sightings, because some bristleworms can move on land as well as in water.
So we've gone from prehistoric reptiles to giant newts to supersized worms.
Yeah.
It seems like the possibilities are endless.
They are, and that's what makes this legend so enduring.
Yeah.
You know, even after decades of research, countless expeditions, the Loch Ness Monster continues to defy easy explanation.
It's like a puzzle with missing pieces.
It is.
We've got all these intriguing sightings and sonar readings.
Yeah.
But nothing quite adds up to a definitive answer.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, I think the answer might not lie in a single definitive creature.
Right.
You know, the legend of Nessie is likely a tapestry woven from misidentifications, hoaxes, folklore, and perhaps perhaps a kernel of genuine mystery that continues to elude our grasp.
So maybe it's not about finding one specific answer.
Yeah.
But about appreciating the mystery itself.
I think so. I think that's the enduring fascination with the Loch Ness Monster.
Yeah.
It reminds us that there's still wonder to be found in the world, even in an age of scientific advancement.
And that's the beauty of a good legend, isn't it?
It is.
It sparks our curiosity.
Yeah.
And it keeps us wondering what might be lurking beneath the surface.
Exactly.
Both literally and figuratively.
I think that's a great way to put it. The legend of Nessie encourages us to keep exploring, to keep questioning, and to never lose that sense of childlike wonder about the world around us.
Well said. And on that note, dear listeners, we leave you with this thought. What do you think lurks beneath the surface of Loch Ness?
Yeah.
Maybe the next chapter in this saga will reveal something even more extraordinary than we can imagine.
Maybe.
Until then. Happy deep diving.